Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel Propaganda Talks, where we talk about Russian propaganda, its origins and nature. And in this video I'm going back to the roots of my channel, where I talk about how certain myths and rhetorical figures were spread into Russian society by education. This time we're going to talk about, among others, about again why many Russians believe that Russia never attacked anybody, and also we're going to discuss the rhetorical figure, they didn't have any other choice. But before I proceed to the topic of this video, I wanted to say thanks to everybody who has donated to me. As always, I have sent the half of the donations to people who need it more than me, the Ukrainian refugees. You can check out the community part of this channel and you will see where and how much I sent. So you can also do it if you wish and can afford it. I actually invite everybody to donate to Ukrainians and to other refugees and to other people who need your help. I believe that helping others is the most important thing. If for some reason you don't know where to donate and how to help those people, and you choose to send money to me, here is how you can do it. I will, as always, send a half. The other half I will use to develop this channel, for example, this time I used it to clean the computer. But coming back to the topic of the video, this time we're going to talk about the beginning of the Second World War and how this period is taught in Russia. Why I have chosen this specific moment of history. Victory in the Second World War has been playing a huge part in the ideology of today's Russia. This might be interesting for American viewers, but many Russians believe that the Soviet Union has played the most important role into fighting against Nazism.
75%, а то и 80% всего потенциала вермахта было уничтожено Красной армией Советского Союза. А кто Берлин-то взял штурмом? Американцы, что ли? Англичане или французы? Красная армия. Подзабыли? Вы что, подзабыли это, что ли, совсем? Да нет, не подзабыли. А просто используют вот эти события прошлого для решения сегодняшних конъюнктурных внутриполитических вопросов.
The Soviet Union definitely fought for many years and played a huge role into finishing this war. The idea of the decisive importance of the Soviet Union in fighting in this war has been so strong in Russians that it's even protected by law. Right now, trying to debunk the decisive role of the Soviet Union in winning the Second World War is against the law, and I'm not going to do that, not only for legal reasons. It's also illegal to compare the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, Stalin and Hitler. And although for many reasons those comparisons have been a classical thing in the history of the 20th century, comparing them in Russia is prohibited. It's one of the laws that teaches where the government comes and tells historians what they can or they can't do because of so-called historical truth. So this part of Russian history, of the Soviet history, has been treated as one of the most important propaganda topics in the current war in Ukraine. The collaboration of some Ukrainians with Nazis has become one of the points of many people to believe in current Nazis in Ukraine and believing that Russians need to go and stop them just like they did in the 1940s. So this time we're going to talk about this period of Russia from 1939 to 1941. To remind you what happened in 1941. 1941 is the beginning of so-called Great Patriotic War. Great Patriotic War is a part of the Second World War when some parts of the military actions were taken on the territory of the Soviet Union. So after the war came to the territory of the Soviet Union started to call it the Great Patriotic War. Великая Отечественная война. This lasted from 1941, as I said, till the end of the Second World War, 1945, when the Soviet army entered Berlin. This war is called the Great Patriotic War because of the mass participation of regular, ordinary people in the partisan war in different parts of the country. And this is in fact not the first patriotic war that we have. The first one is the war from 1812, the part of the Napoleonic War. So since the Second World War, and especially the Great Patriotic War, plays such a huge role in Russian ideology of today, I believe it's specifically interesting to look at this period of time when the Soviet Union was collaborating with Germany. As you probably know, in 1939, when Germany entered Poland from the western side, the Soviet army entered it from the eastern side, taking a part that was prescribed to the Soviet Union by the secret documents from Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Understanding how Russians study about it at school and what is the right interpretation of those events according to the Russian government, and also of taking the Baltic countries and also the Winter War, is an important part of understanding the war of today, and I will explain you why. But first, I will show you how it's described in Russian school books, and then I will show you how this still echoes in today's rhetorics. So let's get started. So let's talk about the material itself. I have chosen 4 different books from different times since the fall of the Soviet Union. We're going to look at each of them, how the different aspects are represented, but also we're going to take a look at the Soviet historiography, how in the Soviet time this or that event of the first years of the Second World War were represented. But let's start with the proportion itself, because I said that it's an important part of that the Second World War is a very important part of the ideology of today. So theoretically, it would mean that this part is represented a lot in the school books, because history of your country is usually the moment when you're supposed to learn the ideology and how you're supposed to think about those events. Here you can see the graph of the number of pages dedicated to the first years of the Second World War. In some cases, it's also with the pre-war period, including the Munich Agreements, and also then the second number is the number of pages that are dedicated to the Great Patriotic War. You can see that in all of them the difference is huge, despite the fact that the events that were happening in the first years of the Second World War are important, and things and the processes in the Soviet Union were very, very active, and foreign policy of the Soviet Union was very active because it was related to the expansion of the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, the amount of attention dedicated to this period is way less than is dedicated to the Great Patriotic War itself. How I'm going to structure the talk about the events themselves. I'm going to show you several events that happened during the first years of the Second World War. I'm going to talk about the main events that happened right before the Second World War and during the Second World War, right before the invasion of the Soviet Union. And we're going to see how those events are being interpreted in the books of today, in the books, and also in the official Soviet historiography. So number 1 is obviously Munich Agreements. For those of you who don't immediately remember what it was, these are the agreements between England, Germany, and France, where England and France were trying to calm Germany down and avoid the war. Here's a general outline of those events. In 1938, Germany claimed the Sudetenland and started to threaten Czechoslovakia to get it by force, and even started some first military movements. Poland and Hungary also started to claim part of the territory of Czechoslovakia and gathered the troops closer to the border. France and Britain, to avoid the war, made an agreement with Germany that forced Czechoslovakia to give away the required part and also to resolve the territorial disputes with Poland and Hungary. Germany later in the next year invaded all the territory of the former Czechoslovakia and basically wiped it out from the existence. Whenever I read about this in English-speaking sources, it's called a failed attempt of appeasement of Germany. Appeasement is a policy when you try to calm down the aggressor as much as you could by giving whatever the aggressor wants. This agreement is thought to be one of the examples of why this policy doesn't work. And we can see because, it didn't work in this time and it didn't stop the Second World War from coming. It didn't stop Germany from invading Czechoslovakia. So this is just a failed agreement. In the Soviet and Russian historiography, it's taken quite differently though. The Soviet historians usually interpreted these events as the main factor that started the Second World War. They accused the parties of this treaty as traitors of Czechoslovakia, and also the Soviet historians also said that by this agreement, Britain and France tried to direct Hitler to the USSR. One of the things that they stressed in the Soviet period of historiography was that the USSR offered to protect Czechoslovakia several times, but Poland didn't let the Soviet Union go through its territories with the military equipment. That's why they didn't do it. Polish, meanwhile, refused to let the Soviet tanks and Soviet soldiers on its territory because they didn't trust the country and thought that it might end up in invasion. This is very similar to what actually Vladimir Putin thinks. If you watch, there is like a whole huge lecture from him in Russian. To me, it looks very weird. He just came to the CIS leaders from many ex-Soviet countries and just started to lecture them about Munich Agreements at the beginning of the Second World War. In this lecture, for example, he repeats the same things that I just said from the Soviet historiography, that the USSR was trying to protect Czechoslovakia while France and Britain just refused to help it. In today's Russia, some authors, in all the books that I chose, authors still consider Munich Agreements as an attempt to put the USSR against Germany. That is how they explain the failed British-Soviet negotiations. Moreover, Munich Agreements in the school books of today are usually taken as an example of why Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, of which we're going to talk just now, was a normal agreement. So number 2 is Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So I just said that Munich Agreements were used as an excuse to Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and in fact, that's why they were important in the contemporary Russian school books. But what is Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact itself, and why do we care? Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is an agreement from 1939 between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany of not attacking each other. It's basically an agreement of friendship, but the problem is that it was accompanied by secret documents that divided Eastern Europe between the countries. In the Soviet historiography, the agreement itself was made public because it was a well-known fact. It was published in the papers of this period, but the secret documents stayed secret till the end of the Soviet Union, despite the fact that they were published during the Nuremberg trials, and it was a well-known part of history in Western Europe, in Western Bloc countries, in Eastern Bloc countries, and in Russia. People just didn't talk about it and pretended that it was not true. So why are those events important? What's so important about Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and how it's represented in school books of Russia? In the Soviet historiography and in Russian books, again, they go along here very well, despite the fact that in the Russian books of today, the secret documents of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact are taken as a real thing. In the Soviet historiography, people just didn't talk about it as something that just didn't exist, right? The stance that they take is very similar. It's taken as a success of Soviet diplomacy. According to Pancratiev's History of Diplomacy, it's taken as a success that made Germany stop for a while and not attack the Soviet Union, and gave some additional time for the Soviet Union to gather the forces to get ready for the war, which was, according to her, inevitable. Russian schools of today, it's taken as three things at the same time. Number one, it's like in the Soviet books, it's the success of the Soviet diplomacy because the USSR moved the border and delayed the war, which gave more time for the Soviet Union to get ready for the war and eventually win in it. Number two, in Russian school books, it's taken as a thing that the Soviet Union couldn't avoid because of the failed negotiations with France and Britain. It's even written there, because the negotiations with France and Britain failed, the Soviet Union had to sign the pact with Nazi Germany. Number three, as I said, is taken as an equivalent of Munich Agreements. Like, if Europe could do that, why couldn't we do that? And this is the position that Putin takes. If Europe did that, why do they talk about a Molotov-Ribbentrop pact? So let's compare those two pacts, those two agreements, and see whether we can put like an equal sign between them. So let's talk about the differences between Munich Agreements and Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and see whether they are different or actually really similar, like Vladimir Putin says. I put several things that are similar and several things that are not. Several things that are similar. Those agreements are between the country with Nazi Germany and the country that would later on fight against it. So this is a thing that is very similar between them. This agreement is theoretically taken to avoid starting the war. According to the official documents, the Soviet Union was trying to avoid the war, and also both of them failed. This is an agreement that gives away other territories to third parties' territories to Nazi Germany. So doesn't it make it similar? Well, at some point does, but there are very big differences between them. So let's talk about the differences now. Number one, Munich Agreement was transparent. There were no secret documents. People knew that it was going to be signed. When it was signed, it was on all newspapers. All the parts of it were public. While in Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it wasn't the case. It was quite unexpected for many parties, for many countries, that the Soviet Union actually signed this paper. And also part of it, basically the most important part of it, was made secret and was not going to be public unless one of the countries lost, like Germany lost, and it became public in the Nuremberg trials. And when the USSR fell apart, it also became public. And the transparency and secrecy, those things are very different about those two pacts. Number two, in Munich agreements, the signing parties, except for Germany, didn't get any territories for themselves. They were just trying to avoid the war. I remind you that the signing parties were Britain, France. Also, there is a signature from Czechoslovakia and Germany, and the only party that was winning in this situation was Germany, unlike in Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, because according to secret documents of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union actually gained a lot of territories. The whole pact and this secret agreement divided Eastern Europe between those two countries, taking away the territories, let's say, putting Baltic countries, part of Finland, half of Poland and a part of Moldavia as a part of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was one of the beneficiaries of this document, unlike Czechoslovakia that was just a victim, or Britain and France that didn't gain anything from it. And the last difference, not a smaller one, is that the country whose territories were given away from it, like they were aware of that. Leaders of Czechoslovakia and also the population of Czechoslovakia, they were aware of this agreement. They knew that this territory was going to be given away. and they read about this in the newspapers, they participated in it, they signed the paper after all. It's true that they didn't participate in the negotiation process, but they were aware of the results of this negotiation process. Unlike Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that just gave away half of Poland to Germany and it took half of Poland for itself, but didn't tell Poland anything about that, just like Finland or Moldavia or Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. None of those countries knew that was happening, that was going to happen. But in Munich Agreements, Czechoslovakia knew about that. So this is the main difference. I don't believe that those agreements can be compared and that this is a correct comparison. I think we should avoid that, and this is just a way of Russia to put itself as a victim of Western countries that tries to recreate the history and trying to get away from the guilt of collaborating with Nazi Germany. But Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is important not only because of this interesting comparison between Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and Munich Agreements, but also from which conclusions should kids get, or not really kids, teenagers should get from talking about this thing. Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is taken as success because with this secret pact, especially, the Soviet Union managed to get more territories, to get bigger distance from Nazi Germany, and with this get more time even when they attacked. So basically the main conclusion that kids should get from that is getting more territories to distance yourself from the enemy is good. Not taking another country as a country with its population, but just using it as some sort of a checkboard to put the distance between yourselves, avoiding what the population itself wants and what people from this country want, is very similar to what Putin says about the war in Ukraine. He says that he uses the same argument when he tries to get some distance from NATO. He says that Ukraine is just some sort of intermediary, some sort of neutral territory between those two blocks.
Представим себе, что Украина станет членом. Подлетное время от Харькова, скажем, и от, не знаю, Днепропетровской до центральной части России, до Москвы, уменьшится до 7-10 минут. Это для нас красная линия или нет?
But we should remember that, in fact, this getting of more territories didn't help the USSR because it failed to get ready, even with those additional time and territories. Poland, meanwhile, became a victim of the both regimes, with the biggest concentration camps from the German side and mass repressions from the Soviet side. So this agreement didn't bring anything good to the Soviet Union despite being taken as success, but kids learned that this is a good thing and that other countries there is just, I don't know, some sort of a empty territory which we can use in our interests. And another conclusion that people can get from reading those school books is that Europe forced the USSR to sign the pact. Europeans were so against the Soviet Union that they were trying to push the Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union so they would fight and eventually die. So the Soviet Union had to sign this paper to avoid being a victim of two regimes. So this is again this very similar thing to what is taken in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine, Russian invasion of Ukraine of today. Russia says that it was forced to do that. There was no other choice, but there was a choice. There was a choice of not making the secret documents and attacking other countries, and there is a choice for Russia still today to not attack, to not bomb civilians and kill people every day. So I believe it's the right time to finish this video because it's getting too long and also takes me too long to make it. But I hope you found it interesting though, because I try to show how Russian system works, how Russian kids study history, and also to show you the base of the arguments that Putin and his lies have. And I hope it was slightly interesting and you could find some more information. If you didn't, please feel free to write about this in the comment section. Also, if you found that there were some mistakes or If you believe I could improve it somehow, please also tell me. I'll do my best to do that. I read all the comments I have to say, but I don't necessarily answer them. I'm sorry about this too. In the next part of the video, I'm going to talk about the Second World War itself. I'm going to talk about the invasion of Poland and Winter War and annexation of Baltic countries. I hope to make the second part of the video as soon as possible. I am really sorry that it takes so much time. I really get worried every time I read the comments, like asking whether I'm safe or not. I'm safe. I live really far away from Russia, in a place where people don't really know much about it. It's like literally the other side of the world. So I mean, it's really far, and you don't worry, I'm super safe. Me, my husband, everything's super fine. The only big reason why I can't make them on time is because I have a full-time job and I sometimes work till 11 p.m. So I hope you're fine also, and you viewers are not in danger. I'll do my best to be more active and to send the video as soon as I can. Thank you a lot for all your attention. If you came to this moment, it means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Thank you, and for your comments, and nice ones and not nice ones. All of them are important to me. I do my best to get better. And see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed it.